All right, it's time for us to get going here. So hopefully you're already taking the exam, and I will go ahead and be grading those soon. And somebody did tell me they ran out of time on the essay. If you want to rewrite your essay or you needed more time, I'm willing to let you guys do that. So just go ahead and email me if you want to spend some more time working on your essay. Um, I haven't graded them yet, and I know I meant to extend the time on the exam, and I never did that. So if you ran out of time, just let me know, and anybody, even if you did run out of time, and you want more time for your essay, let me know. All right, so we're moving now into new material, and the basic. And I told you the other day. Um, I told you the other day that we're gonna have to try and cut down on some of the material because next Thursday I won't be able to be here, so we're gonna miss at least one day, and we're already kind of behind. So normally what we do though is we do a pretty big deep dive into the research process, and then we go into two other topics, which are the family and education. And we look at both of those with a focus on research, focus on the idea that research process. So the idea was that, still, we will learn a little bit about how sociologists do their research process. And by the way, this is where we're really getting into sociology with a capital S. We've been learning in this class, you can kind of think of sociology as two different things. One is a tool that we all use every day, and on the other side, a science that professional people engage in. And you probably won't spend much time being a professional sociologist in your life unless you major in sociology and all of that. But it's important to learn how sociologists do their work. And it's important, I think, for understanding things like social policies. Like if you're trying to figure out as a person, what kind of government policies do you support or not? What laws do you believe in or not? And would you support or not, and which candidates? A lot of that can come down to, or it should if you're a thinking person, well, what does research show about what kind of policies are good or not? That's what a lot of social research is trying to figure out is if we as a country or a city or a town or a state, if we do this, what will happen versus if we do that? And so even if you don't go on to be a professional sociologist, being able to evaluate research and look at it and go, was this a good study they did? Because they're telling me we should do this based on this study, but if it was a bad study that somebody did, then the decision making, we shouldn't make a decision based on it. People call it like actionable research. And that's that kind of process of trying to figure out, I want to answer a question so that I can make a decision about how to act. That basic process, plays out in a lot of ways. It happens here at school. Like if we're trying to figure out as a school, should we allow students to stay home when they work, or on school, should we have more online classes or more face-to-face? And we might want to know, like, do students learn better in face-to-face or do they learn better at home? And we might want to make our policy this choice based on something like that. There's all kinds of questions that arise about, that can be addressed with research. And so anyway, being good at figuring out, is this good research that we did or not good research? And a lot of times, organizations have to do research to figure out what choices they're going to make or actions they're going to take. So it could be a school doing that. Your family could do it. I mean, if you're trying to figure out, like, what school should I send my kid to? You might want to go look at the data and the research on which schools are better than others. Like, should I send my kid to a charter school or a public school? Should I send them to a private school? So decisions your family makes. Which hospital should I go to? Which food should I eat? I'm trying to figure out, should I, like later today, I'm gonna have to go eat lunch. And I like to go to Taco Naco over there in Olivehurst, and I like to get a chorizo burrito, right? But chorizo, the research shows, will kill you quicker and sooner than if you're eating healthier stuff. So, but you might want to see that research. Is it believable? Is it true? Is it really the case that if I eat more chorizo than vegetables, that I'll die sooner? That research, by the way, is quite conclusive. Yes, cured meats a lot. It's not as healthy for you as eating plant-based things. But anyway, so I'm just trying to show you that even if you're not going to be a professional sociologist, there's a lot of reasons to pay attention to how research is done, the research process, and trying to figure out if it's good research or not. Because people put out studies all the time and say, I did a study and I found out that, there are, UFOs or something, or there are aliens, Well, was it a good study? And so you want to make sure that it's a good study. So that's one of the things we want to spend some time on, is figuring out how do you do good sociological research. And then we're going to get into some topics, the family and education, and we're going to focus on different ways that those topics have been studied by sociologists. So let's get into it. I wrote this down. I don't normally put my notes up before I do it, but I want to remind myself, I want to make sure we do cover these 3 points. There's a lot more I normally cover when I talk about the research process, but I want to highlight these 3, and these will be on the test in one way or another. So what does it mean to say causation is not, correlation is not causation, is what that should say. Correlation is not causation. And that's usually where I start the research process discussion. I note that there was a study that was done in the 1970s that said that pot smoking was correlated with GPA. So it's a study on college students. They studied all kinds of college students, and they asked, basically, do they smoke marijuana or don't they smoke marijuana? Pot, in other words. And then they wanted to look at their grades and see, are you likely to, who gets better grades? People who smoke pot or people who don't smoke pot? And the research showed that pot smoking is correlated with GPA, and that as pot smoking goes up, GPA goes up. In other words, students that smoke pot had higher grades than students who didn't smoke pot. Now I want to ask you, if you read that study, and that was the finding of the study, does that tell you you should start smoking pot if you want your grades to go up? Why not? I mean, you're saying no, for sure. The study showed that. It showed that pot smoking was correlated with GPA. So doesn't that tell you that if I smoke pot, my grades will go up? No, why not? If you see this correlation, so this is called a correlation, meaning these 2 things are correlated. When we look at a group of people, like 1,000 college students, and we ask, well, which ones of them smoke pot and which ones don't, and then we compare the ones that their grades, what are their grades, and we see the ones that said they smoked pot had higher grades. But you're saying, no, I'm not dumb. I'm not going to jump to the conclusion that if I just smoke pot, my grades will go up. So what else could it be? In other words, if you're looking at this and you say, well, the data showed that they were correlated, but maybe it's not causal. Maybe you could have higher grades when you smoke pot, but that doesn't mean that it was the smoking the pot that led to the higher grades. So how else can you explain it? If we're gonna be researchers, and one of the big differences between research and other kinds of ways of knowing, there's lots of ways to decide something. I was talking about using studies. A lot of people don't use studies to decide what they're gonna do. They use faith, for example. I'll just go pray to God and wait for an answer from God about what I should do. And maybe that works for some people. Other people rely on a more research-based process. And research, what's different from praying to God versus doing research, is logic and evidence. Other ways of knowing don't necessarily use logic and evidence. It's not logical to say that there's some supernatural being living in the heavens that we can't see, but it's everywhere and it knows everything and it's taking care of us. It's not logical because you can't see that, you can't test it, you can't measure it. It might be true. In other words, faith is a different thing than science. Science only uses logic and evidence. And if you can't measure something in science, then you can't see if it's true or not. So I would say in science, if we're asking, is God true or not? Science doesn't really have an answer to that question because God is not something that can be measured. So you can't really test. Does God exist or not? There's no Godometer, there's no God measurement device. So we can't, in science, deal with the concept called God. It's a different thing. It comes from faith. You can go to church and learn about faith. But in a classroom, on a college campus, we use logic and evidence to decide things. And so logically speaking, logic is, it can be a mental process of deciding, I don't know how to define logic, but you're saying logically, I'm not going to conclude that just because the data showed that somebody who smoked pot got higher grades than somebody who didn't, logically, there's other possible explanations for this, isn't there? Can you think of logically why I shouldn't conclude? Like, could there be other possibilities? That's what a logician would ask. Is okay, there's these two things seem to go together, but could there be some other explanation other than smoking pot led to the higher grades? Can you think of anything? If I ask right now in this classroom who smokes pot and who doesn't, and I found out that you smoke a lot of pot and he doesn't, but you got a higher grade on the test and he didn't, is it the pot? Is that the only explanation? Could there be some other reason why you got a higher grade than he did? You studied more. Yeah, it had nothing to do with the pot. You just happened to study more. And he was playing video games. So it could be a totally different cause. And logically, we have to ask, where else could the causes be? We call this the X variable. It's sometimes we're asking, is it the independent variable? Is it the thing that causes, is it the thing that this is dependent on? When we're trying to figure out if one thing causes another, what we're really asking is this thing dependent on this thing? Does this thing need this thing? You got a higher grade than he. Did it depend on the pot smoking? Maybe not. Maybe it depended on something else. And if it depended on something else, where would that happen in this process? Well, you're saying, I studied more. Just say more study. Study. Study is also a variable. Variables are things that vary. And you can vary in how much pot you smoke. You could vary in how much grades you get, what grades you get. You can also vary in terms of how much you study. And we want to know, does variations in study lead to higher grades? And if you did a study on that, do people who study a lot get higher grades than people who don't study a lot? I'm sure you'd find a very strong correlation between studying a lot and getting higher grades. And so maybe we're just looking at the wrong thing here. We would still need to ask, is there a reason why people who smoke pot study more? This is then what we would call an intervening variable. It intervened, it came in between. So you both got to Yuba College, you both started Yuba College, you started smoking pot now that you're 18 or whatever. He didn't, he kept not doing that. And then you both took classes and stuff and you got grades. And he ended up with lower grades than you, a lower GPA, even though he was the one not smoking pot. Something intervened between the smoking pot and the grades. For you, you say it could have been I studied more. So there can be things that happen between two things. Just because you see that X and Y go together, they're correlated, it doesn't logically mean that X is the reason why Y is changing. Logically, we can say to ourselves, there's something that happens in between. Maybe there could be. And if we're going to be good scientists, good researchers, we have to consider other possibilities than the thing we thought was the reason. Sometimes people are superstitious, and superstition is like not being scientific. So like when I was a kid, when I played football, I noticed we won the game the other day on the football team, and under my pads, I was wearing this red shirt. Well, I'm going to wear that same red shirt next time we play because we won when I wore the red shirt. So we're definitely going to win when I wear the red shirt. Is that good thinking? That's superstitious thinking. That's like not really based on scientific thinking. You could ask, are there other reasons why your team won besides you wore a red shirt? I mean, yeah, there's probably a lot of other possibilities that are the reason why the team won, other than Mark was wearing a red shirt that day. But superstition's a weird thing. And you're like, well, maybe, well, red shirt didn't hurt us winning, so I might as well wear it again. But what I'm saying is that logically you have to ask, are there something in between here that caused this? We can also ask, was there something before? Antecedent variable. Antecedent means before. Is there something that could have happened before you both came to college that explains why right now he's getting better grades than you? Is there something that could be true about you both, a difference between you, a variation between you? Again, variable. Is there something that's a variation between you that could explain why he gets good grades and you don't? Like what? What could be something that pre-exists coming to Yuba College? Something that was already true before you got here, and then you got here and it was still true, and that's why you were getting better grades than him. What would be a reason some people get better grades than others that has nothing to do with pop?
Tutoring, more sleep.
Okay. So who can get tutoring and who can't? I mean, what's a factor that affects who gets tutoring or not? So I guess I'll just talk. You guys can try and understand what I'm saying. So there's things that can be true about people before they start doing something. One of the things that's often the case in sociology is that SES, socioeconomic status, is something people already have before they've been studied. And socioeconomic status means things like your income, your education, your parents' education level. It basically means your class, your social class. And people who come from higher socioeconomic status, if you have parents that went to college, if you have parents that have a lot of extra money, if you have those things before you get to college, you might have an advantage in terms of getting better grades than people who can't afford tutoring, whose parents never went to college, whose parents don't speak English. So socioeconomic status can be a pre-existing fact about a person that is the variable that explains something like why they got better grades. We looked at a similar thing at the very beginning of this class. We asked, why is there more binge drinking nowadays than there used to be? And so we said, college students binge drinking. What was the cause of it? We were trying to figure out what's the cause of more binge drinking. And as we took apart that data, as we talked about it, we saw that upper middle class people that can go to fraternities and sororities and join them, are much more likely to binge drink at college than people who can't afford them. So that was one where SES was the factor that explained why some people were doing more binge drinking than others. But, and so in this case, logically what we're asking is, are there other reasons why people, we see a correlation, but we can't as scientists just assume when we see a correlation that X is the cause, that X is the independent variable. We have to look for other possibilities first before we conclude that, because we're trying to be logical, careful scientists. Another term I would use that makes the research process different from other kinds of ways of deciding things, the term is rigor. Scientific rigor. Rigor means hard work, basically. And scientists will say, good science is rigorous. It has gone through the work of being good science. And bad science is kind of sloppy and lazy. And what does it mean to be a hardworking scientist? Well, first of all, it means making sure your logic is correct. And it's common that people make logical errors when they assume that X causes Y. We can say, in effect, that what we're always trying to study with the research process is causality. What causes something to happen? And it's not always easy to figure out what causes what. I'll give you another example. I sometimes have anger issues, and I was talking to a doctor yesterday about how do you control anger issues. And he said, well, you could take this drug that we could prescribe you that lowers your blood pressure. And I said, and so he said, if you lowered your blood pressure, that would calm down your central nervous system and you wouldn't be so quick to anger. And I said, okay, but doc, which way does the causal arrow go here? You're saying anger, blood pressure, anger. Is it getting angry that raises my blood pressure? Or is it my blood pressure rising that leads me to act out in angry ways? I said, so like if I were to control my blood pressure with some other means, not with drugs, with supplements, you can take other things that help you with your blood pressure, exercise. So if I could lower my blood pressure through other means, would that affect my anger issue? And he said, no, the anger is related to the central nervous system. And yes, these drugs help calm down your central nervous system, which lowers your blood pressure. But lowering your blood pressure on its own would not bring down your anger, he was saying. So that's another case where we're trying to figure out which causes which. Is it high blood pressure that causes anger? Or is it anger that causes high blood pressure? Or is it your nervous system being upset that causes the anger and the blood pressure? I mean, so trying to figure out what causes what is what science is all about. And I'm giving you a sort of silly one. There was a real study that said that people who smoke pot, it was correlated with higher grades. But the people who did the study said, we don't think, our common sense tells us that just sitting around smoking marijuana is not going to lead to higher grades. So we don't think that's the cause. That would not be accurate to say it's the cause. But if you use logic and evidence, you could try to figure out what would make sense of this data. So maybe it's studying more that leads to higher grades, as you said, but why are the people who smoke pot studying more? They still have to explain this correlation. It's not the cause, but it's still there as a correlation. So if you're going to have a theory that it's the studying, you'd have to explain, well, why is studying correlated with the smoking pot too? Because what you're saying is, well, the way it happens is there are people who smoke pot, they study more, and they get better grades, and the ones who didn't smoke pot, they didn't study more. And that was the real reason they got the lower grades. So I would have to ask you, what's your explanation for why pot smokers are studying more? And you could say, well, maybe it's just focus. People who are focused study more. And maybe for some people, smoking pot helps them focus or something like that. But this explanation on the other side means you don't even have to worry about what happened in between. It's common that what explains this is that something was already true that explains this. So if you come into school already with high SES, you're already at an advantage to get better grades than other people. And you're at an advantage to buy marijuana and smoke marijuana more than other people. And so if you just have better means, you have the means to get tutoring, to cheat. I mean, that's another possible explanation here, isn't it? Too. So we could also add, maybe it's cheating. Maybe the people who smoke pot, the people who break our drug laws, are also the people who cheat and get better grades. Maybe it's easier classes. Maybe the people who smoke pot just want to sit around and take easy classes, and the people who aren't smoking pot are taking harder classes that are harder to get good grades in. So again, we're just trying to think through. We see that there's a correlation, but we're being skeptical, rigorous scientists, by saying, could it be something else? And there are other possible variables we could, think about here, and I could ask for your theories. What are some other reasons why people get good grades that you know of? And could it help us explain this correlation that we see here? I don't know why this class just stares at me when I ask questions, so I'm trying not to get angry like I tend to do and say, no, I'm not angry. You have some reason why you're not raising your hand, so maybe I'm not explaining it well.
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question?
So there's a correlation sitting here. The people who smoke pot got better grades than the people who didn't smoke pot. But we don't trust that. We don't think that's the real cause. That somehow if I just smoke more pot, my grades will go up. No, that's not true, probably. So we're trying to figure out what else could be the variable. If it isn't the pot smoking that explains why the pot smokers had better grades, we're trying to figure out what else could it be. Pot smokers had better grades. That's true. That's what the data showed. But we don't think it's the pot smoking itself that was the reason. There might be some other variable that's a better explanation. In a sense, I'm asking for your theory. What's your theory that could explain why pot smokers got better grades? One theory is they studied more, and it's possible. One theory is they just had more money coming in. These were the students that have more money than others, and they buy pot with it, and they buy tutoring with it. Another theory is they just took easier classes. These pot smokers are lazy slackers, and they like smoking pot, and they take easy classes, and they end up with easy grades. But the hardworking students, they took organic chemistry and anatomy and stuff, and they were struggling, but they weren't smoking pot. And so their grades were lower, but it wasn't that they were, dumber or something like that. So we're trying to, so the researchers who did the study, their explanation ended up being something they called, and it was an antecedent variable. They said it was intellectual curiosity. If you're trying to figure out what variations there are between students that make them likely to get higher grades than others, when we're talking about college students, these researchers said it's this quality that we can call intellectual curiosity. It's this thing, some people have it and some don't. What is intellectual curiosity? Intellectual curiosity is wanting to know things, wanting to experience new ideas and new experiences is the way I would put it. Some people don't want new ideas and new experiences. Some people are like, I already know what I believe, I already know how I feel about things, and I don't want some college professor or some other college student introducing me to some new idea or new behavior. I already know, my parents already taught me how to live. Some people come to college though with like, I want to know like what other people are up to. I want to find out like what things people eat, what drugs they take, what things they do in their free time. If you're curious about people and why they do what they do, then college is actually a really interesting place to go because there's all kinds of new people and new things to learn. On the other hand, if you're more of a closed-minded person, then college might not be that great for you because it's all about being exposed to new ideas and new ways of thinking. And so if you're the kind of person that likes new ideas and new ways of thinking, you might be the kind of person that when you came to college, you tried some marijuana. You're also the kind of person that probably raises your hand a lot in class and says like, hey, why did you do it this way? Why did you do it that way? And I can tell you as a professor right now, the students that just sit there and sit in the back and never talk, the message to us as professors is we don't like your class, we don't want to know what you're teaching, we don't want to be involved. The people who sit up front and they're raising their hand and they're always asking questions, we love those people. They come to our office hours, they write us emails and go, can you tell me more about the research process? If you want to do well in school, be an intellectually curious person. Now, that's not true maybe in high school. In high school, the people that are always asking questions and raising their hands, sometimes the teachers get annoyed with them because they're like, I'm just trying to teach. I don't need you asking all these questions. But in college, it's a little bit different situation. College professors themselves tend to have been intellectually curious people that did all that hand raising and stuff. And so we like those kind of kids that always want to know stuff, always asking, always challenging the teacher. So I'm trying to tell you, it's a little lesson in college behavior. Sitting on your hands and never talking is a bad idea. Even if you don't know the answer, raising your hand and trying to ask a question, trying to answer the teacher's question is a much better strategy than just, I'm going to stay below the radar and sit in the back and they'll never notice me. You want to be noticed in college. You want to be noticed in real life. I think that's part of the problem with the American education system. We teach kids to be passive and sit back and wait for somebody else to do it. When in the real world, if you want to be a success in your job, in the workplace, being a doer and a show up, be there, ask questions, those are good things to be. Anyway, so that's what these researchers concluded was, and again, this was back in the 1970s, when marijuana was seen differently than it is nowadays. Back in those days, it was seen as something that might enlighten you, something that might make you think new thoughts that you never thought before, or experience music or food in a way you never had before. And so if we're trying to understand why would college students smoke pot, maybe it was because of intellectual curiosity, of wanting to try new things and experience new things. And if that's the reason, maybe that helps explain why these people were also getting good grades. They're the kind of people that get good grades in college. Whereas people that are very closed-minded, they never try pot, they never do, and they're, just getting through their classes. They're not shining in the classes. So anyway, that was their explanation. I don't know if today, if we'd even find this correlation. If I asked at Yuba College, do you smoke pot or not, and what are your grades, I'm not sure that we would see any difference between the marijuana smokers and the non-marijuana smokers. Why? Because marijuana smoking has become much more common than it used to be. It used to be pretty concentrated among a pretty select group of people, upper middle class white people in college were the ones smoking the pot. And so if you were like somebody with that not upper middle class and things like that, so it's related to SES in a way too. But anyway, so I'm not sure you would find that today, and and the more that a behavior gets used by a lot of people, the less differences there's going to be between the people who do it and the people who don't do it. And so that's another key. But the main point I'm trying to get here, what was my point? Am I trying to tell you you should smoke pot so you can get good grades? No, I'm trying to illustrate the idea that just because two things are correlated doesn't mean they're causally connected. And what being a good scientist means is really trying to figure out what is the cause of something, and not just being lazy and going, yeah, I saw this happen and then this happened, so I think this is the cause. And politicians often want you to be lazy and not think things through. So they'll say things like, we got all these people coming in the border, and we also got higher crime. So we've got to close the border. So that's your variable. You're saying people coming in at the border, crime rate. And you're just assuming that's the connection, that's the cause. And you haven't asked, is it the illegal immigrants causing it? Are they the ones doing the crime? Are there other reasons why people are coming across the border and causing crime, like poverty? So we want to be careful and clear before we decide what is the cause of something. And in fact, there's 3 criteria of causation that I want to make sure we know. And I'm running out again. 3 criteria of causation that I want to make sure we know. Let me see if I have any pens. Oh, good. Okay. Does X come before Y? So science has come, a lot of different kinds of science, not just sociology, deal with this basic thing. We're looking at 2 variables and we're trying to figure out, did X cause Y? It's the basis of all science. Like, does cigarette smoking cause cancer? Does fertilizer help tomato plants grow better? Do cars contribute to global warming? There's all kinds of X, Y correlations that scientists are trying to understand better. And so it's kind of the central question of all science is, does X cause Y? And if you're going to say that X causes Y, that would be a theory. And we started this class talking about theories. So theories are attempts to explain data. And if you're going to put forth a theory and say, I think X causes Y, like I think pot smoking causes grades to go up, or I think, poverty causes crime, or I think, economic problems in Mexico cause the border to more people to cross the border. If you're going to try and explain the data, if you're going to come up with a causal theory, there are certain criteria that your theory has to meet for other scientists to take you seriously. And it's a good idea to think of science as like a conversation. It's a group of people all trying to answer questions like does X cause Y? And if you're going to contribute to that conversation, there are certain ways you need to act and think in order for that conversation to pay any attention to you. And so when you come to the scientific conversation with a theory and you say, I think I know the answer of why this is happening, you better make sure that you've satisfied certain logical questions. if you say X caused Y, you have to first show that X actually happened first. I mean, it's basic logic. But if you say X is the cause of Y, then you're saying X happened first and then Y happened. But it can be hard sometimes with sociological data to know which came first. Like I was saying, is it the high blood pressure that came first and then the anger, or did the anger come first and then the high blood pressure? And it's not always that easy to tell even in that case, because somebody might always have high blood pressure and it might go up sometimes. But anyway, another, so like we were just saying, you know, with X and Y, with pot smoking and grades, which came first? I mean, it might be that if we're talking about college students, maybe back in high school, some students experimented with marijuana. And, or maybe they were already good students. Maybe they already had good grades in high school. And so when they came to college, they thought, well, I can smoke pot and still get good grades because I'm good at getting good grades. Whereas other people didn't do so well in high school. When they got to college, they're like, I better not do anything else but study. And so maybe the good grades preceded the pot smoking. In other words, maybe it's people who find school easy, college easy, that are more likely to smoke pot in college and still get good grades. And the other people are people that were struggling in high school, and so they got to college and they didn't smoke pot, but they still didn't get the best grades ever. In that case, you'd say was the good grades came before pot smoking. It didn't cause pot smoking, but it kind of was a privilege that allowed some people to feel like they could smoke pot. Anyway, we're just trying to see, did X come before Y? And like in the whole global warming debate, if there is a debate, but there were some people trying to claim global warming isn't being caused by humans. Humans didn't cause global warming. And we'd say, well, how do you know? They say, well, the world was warming before there was humans. There have been warming trends at other times, was one of the data they tried to use. And so which came first is the question. But if you can't show that X definitely came first, then you're not going to be able to convince the scientific community, the conversation, that your theory is right. They'll say, well, you haven't shown that your thing came first. So we don't know if you're right. But that's only one criterion. The next criterion is, does Y vary when and only when X varies? So if somebody's going to say, I think X is the cause of Y, then they're saying, when X goes up, Y goes up. Or they might say, when X goes down, Y goes down. Or they might say, when X stays still and doesn't change, Y stays still and doesn't change. But what they're trying to say is that the variation of Y depends on the variation of X. It's dependent on it. And if you could show, as somebody else, that, you know, if they say, I think human cars and human, you know, carbon dioxide emission is the cause of global warming, then if somebody else could show, well, I was able to show in the data that there were other times in human history, in world history, when carbon dioxide went way up and there were no cars, well, then that would put a hole in my theory. But if you can show that, you know, there were certain carbon dioxide levels for billions of years, and then there were humans, and then there were cars, and then there was a carbon dioxide, then you could say, well, the variation in carbon dioxide depended on the cars. So you need to be able to show, this is called covariation, in other words. If X came first and Y, well, this is called covariation. This is called chronological, you know, chronicity, if it happened first. And this one is, you know, covariation. Do they vary together? But if you've got chronicity and covariation, you haven't proved causality, just like we just were looking at. When they showed that pot smoking was correlated with grades, what they were showing was, yes, they came to college and you know, then before they got to college, nobody had smoked pot. They got to college, some did smoke pot and some didn't, and the ones who did got good grades. So the pot smoking happened, then the grades happened, and the grades were higher for the pot smokers. That's correlation. If you have these two things, you have a correlation. But you don't have causation yet. You haven't proved that X is the cause of Y. Because as we said, logically speaking, there could be a Z variable here, which is an intervening one. Intervening variable. Or there could be a Z variable here, an antecedent variable. And if I haven't proved that it isn't these other things, it's definitely this that's causing this. So when you said, maybe it's easier classes, maybe it's studying more, maybe it's higher GPA, maybe it's higher intellectual curiosity. Well, we need to go look at the data. If the data are still telling me that the grades are dependent on the pot smoking, and it has nothing to do with intellectual curiosity or SES, so we would have to have data on this. But if we looked at the students again, we said some said they smoked pot and some said they didn't. Now let's look at how much income their parents have. And the ones who smoke pot say their average income of their parents is, $10,000. And the ones who don't smoke pot, their average income is $0 or something. Well, that's telling me maybe it isn't the pot smoking, it's the SES. But if they had the similar SES, the pot smokers and the non-pot smokers, then that's telling me, well, pot still seems to be the main difference between them. It's not the SES, it's the pot. That's the variation. That explains it. But you have to look. You have to go look at your data and see, can these other possible causes be the real cause of what I'm looking at? It's sort of like murder mysteries. I don't know if you've ever read murder mysteries, but if you see a dead body, that's the Y, and you see somebody standing there with a knife, that's the X. Can you logically conclude, I walked into a room, there's a person standing there with a knife, and there's a dead body on the ground? Am I a good detective if I arrest that guy and go try him and never consider any other possibility? And the guy's sitting there saying, I didn't do it. Yeah, you did it. I see that you did it. There's a dead person here and there's a knife in your hand. Is there any other possible explanation for what happened? Yeah, we weren't there. What? Could have been self-defense. Could have been somebody else left the room. This guy came in and found the knife and picked it up, but somebody else was already there and did it. There's all kinds of possibilities other than what my eyes are telling me. I see a correlation. There's a guy with a knife and there's a dead person, but that doesn't mean the guy with the knife killed the person. And same with good science. It's like being a good detective. I saw that pot smoking was there and the grades were there, but does that mean pot smoking is the suspect? Pot smoking is the murderer here, or the guy who did it? There's other possible suspects. Like maybe it's studying better. Maybe it's cheating. Maybe it's, or maybe it's they just had more money and got more tutors. Or they asked their parents. Their parents were well-educated people, and they said, "Can you write my paper for me?" Or something like that. There's all kinds of ways that people can get good grades other than smoking pot. And if you didn't consider those others, then you're being a bad scientist. And so that third criterion is, have other possible causes been ruled out? A good detective goes and talks to these other suspects. Where were you on the night of, January 10th? I was in Chicago. Oh, okay, well then I can rule you out. You couldn't have done it. You weren't here. So you try to rule out all the suspects until you're left with one suspect who can't be ruled out, and all the evidence points to you. And then you have to ask, do I have the evidence to convince a jury? And in a similar way, as a scientist, you have to say, do I have the evidence to convince the conversation, the scientific conversation, that my theory is the right one? And so it's good to keep these criteria in mind as we're going to look at some research, and a lot of the research has this basic structure of trying to see, did X cause Y? And we want to always ask, are there other possible reasons? Did X really come first? Does Y vary really only when X varies? And if so, are there other possible reasons why X and Y vary? And if I can't find any or can't rule them out, then I can be pretty sure I've found the cause of the variation. Oh, I erased all my notes of what we were going to cover, but we covered this first thing, which is correlation is not causation. We've covered the criteria of causation. I'm trying to get through this lecture as quickly as I can so we can move on. And these are all things that are going to come up again as we talk about the research. A third issue I want to make sure we understand is the basic difference between quantitative versus qualitative studies. There's two main types of data in sociology. There's quantitative, just call this quant, and on the other side, qual. Quantitative refers to numbers. So one way to study people is to count things. Count their behavior, count them, count up stuff using numbers. And that is an important way of deciding whether theories are true or not. Like the theories we just talked about, in order to test them, we need to go collect numbers and compare numbers and see which theories, actually explain the numbers. And so that's quantitative studies. So the type of data is what we're talking about here. Quantitative studies use numbers. Qualitative studies use a variety of other things as their data, but they all kind of come down to, I would say, words or texts. So some sociologists don't spend a lot of time with numbers. I'm not great with numbers. I'm not a good math person. I don't like crunching numbers on a computer. I don't like statistics. I'm much more of a qualitative sociologist. I'm much more comfortable working with people's words and the things they write than numbers. But just being comfortable with different kinds of data isn't a good enough reason to decide which kind of data should I use to answer my research question. And by the way, I normally cover that. A good thing to keep in mind is research isn't about proving hypotheses. It isn't about starting with a theory and proving your theory is right. It's really more about answering questions. Like, I want to figure out why something happens. And then I want to go about doing research to figure out why that happens. So it's a really good idea to keep in mind that in science, we're not really trying to prove anything is true. Normally, I spend more time on this point too, but I guess I can't forget to cover it, which is, it's not really about proving things are true, science, because you can't prove something's true forever unless you have all the data. And we don't have all the data. New data could become available tomorrow. So really what science is about is proving things aren't true. We're much better at proving things false than proving things are definitely true. So like, for example, if you say that God created the universe, science can't prove that's false. Why not? Because you can't measure it. You can't measure God. If you can't measure God, then you can't see if that's true or not. And so people who believe that God created the universe, they believe it on the basis of faith. They just know it's true. A scientist can't test it because the concept of God, if you ask, well, what is God? Well, God is everywhere and everything. Well, where is there a universe that wasn't created by God that I could compare to ours to see if ours was a God-created one? No. Okay, well, there's no way to test this theory. It just is. If I were to say the Big Bang created the universe, that actually can be tested because it's based on the idea that there's a certain amount of energy in the universe and it started out as a little tiny point and it expanded. And by the way, that theory is having some trouble right now because if new data becomes available that contradicts the theory, then you have to change the theory. And science is right now in the process of realizing the Big Bang theory that Einstein came up with, that it all started at one point and exploded and it's still, and it eventually will reach a point where it's not expanding anymore, the universe, and it will start going back on itself. That's what Einstein said. Well, new data they're finding based on the telescopes they have now is that the universe is actually expanding more and faster than it was before, which does not fit the Big Bang theory. So they've had to go back to the drawing board and change the theory and try to say, well, we've got it, it's got to fit the data. And the data are telling us that this old theory is not right, it's false. There's no data that can prove the God theory false. I can't give some Christian a data that says, well, we have new data that says God didn't create the universe. Well, they'll be like, I'm not changing my theory, because it's not a theory, it's faith. Anyway, so theories are open to new data and falsification and all of that. And so, anyway, so numbers, if you're trying to prove things are true, or not true, you need numbers and you need to be able to measure it. Words and text are a little bit different, as we'll get to. So, but this is the basic distinction is between quantitative and qualitative. Another big, another key thing is, how do they get their data? Types of study designs, I'll call them. Quantitative sociologists mainly use surveys. That's the main type of data. Surveys, I'm sure you've taken them. Surveys are big studies where they ask a lot of people a bunch of questions. And the questions they ask are what are known as forced choice questions and closed-ended. If you've ever filled out a survey, in fact, they have one right now on Canvas. I haven't checked it out. There's a student survey they want you to fill out. And again, that's a school trying to collect data to answer research questions. Like they want to know certain things and they want to make decisions about how to go forward. So they're collecting data on the students. And surveys are good ways of collecting data on a lot of people. It's a quick and dirty method of getting data on a lot of people. But the questions on the survey are forced choice, meaning what? They give you a question like, how old are you? How much money do you make? Is it between 0 and 20,000? Is it between 20,000 and 50,000? Is it between 50,000 and 100,000? Is it over 100,000? In other words, they give you choices of what the answer can be, and then you have to pick the one that seems closest to you. And they're closed-ended. There's only one answer, and you pick it. How do we get words and texts from people? There's a variety of ways to do it. The main way, though, is what we can call interviews. When you interview somebody, that's different than being surveyed, right? I don't know if you've ever been interviewed or interviewed somebody, but when you sit down with somebody to ask them questions face to face, that's very different than filling out a survey that somebody gave you. The big difference is interviews use open-ended questions. When you interview somebody, you don't say something like, how much money do you make? I'm going to give you A, B, C, D choice, and you tell me which one, right? That would not be a normal way to talk to somebody. But you might say something like, let's talk about your income. Can you tell me about it? It's open-ended, meaning you just put out the idea there, and they get to decide how to talk about it, what to tell you about it, what not to tell you about it. It's very different than saying, here's 4 choices, pick which one. This is much more like dominating and controlling. This is much more like, we're 2 fellow humans, let's sit down and talk a little bit. And by the way, I mentioned, different types of sociologists. It's not a good research reason to pick which one that you like better. But when I was in graduate school in sociology at UC Santa Cruz, the sociologists in my department didn't like each other. And it was clear that there were 2 big teams. On one team was like the quantitative people, and on the other team were the qualitative people. And why do they hate each other? Well, if you dug a little deeper into what were the differences between them, the qualitative people were mainly women. Women that were feminist sociologists. And these guys were more the male, alpha male, aggressive guys, controlling, dictating, counting. The women sociologists said, well, when we want to gather data from people, we don't want to control them and force them to give us data. we want to sit down with them and have a conversation. So some people say there's a more feminist kind of sociology, a more feminist kind of method. These are, by the way, all called methodologies. What's your methodology for studying people? And there are more feminist methodologies than others, but basically there's quantitative methods and qualitative methods. And I don't recommend, or it's a bad idea to choose your methodology based on your personality. In other words, just because you don't like numbers doesn't mean that you should not use quantitative sociology. Or just because you like talking to people is not the reason to choose a qualitative method. But it is the case that some people are better at one thing or the other. And more nowadays, sociologists realize we need a team of sociologists to work together. Some people need to be the qualitative people that do interviewing and stuff like that. And other people need to be the number crunchers, the quantoids. And a good research team has people with both kinds of skills on the team. And so interviewing people, it's much more in-depth. This is also what's known as a snapshot in time. So like if you survey people, you're just finding out how they think or feel right now. Like you give people a survey and you say, are you happy right now? Are you a little bit happy, somewhat happy, not at all happy? How much do you like Trump? Do you like Trump a little bit, a lot of it, not at all? I don't know how they say it, but and it's right now. How do you feel right now? And in real life, people aren't that predictable, right? I mean, if you really talk to somebody over time, they might say, well, I used to like Trump, and now I don't like him so much, or now that he's on trial, I'm seeing all these things about him, and maybe I'm not going to vote for him. In other words, if you were to just take a snapshot, it looks like they love Trump. But if you were to talk to somebody over time, you'd see it's more nuanced than that. There's times they love him, times they don't. And so this is more like not a snapshot, this is more like a video, I would call it. Because it's showing people over time. When you interview people, you can ask them things like, did you always like Trump? Like, how much do you like Trump? And they say, oh, I really love the guy. Okay, well, did you always? Why do you love him? How much, when do you love him? Which times have you loved him the most? What things does he do that you love the most? I mean, you can get much more in depth with people when you interview them than when you just survey them in a quick and dirty way. So surveys don't give us very in-depth information. They give us surface information. They give us right now, in the moment information. This gives us much more in-depth information, much more over time kind of information. And so that raises questions about, well, when would you use either one of these methods? Why should I use one or the other? Well, one big issue is scope. How much data can you get? Scope is how big of a study can you do? In interviews, the problem here is this kind of method of long, open-ended interviews with people, that reduces the numbers of people you can cover in your study. When I studied military enlistment, I wanted to do in-depth interviews with young people about why they enlisted. But each one of those interviews was like an hour long. And so I really only had the ability to do 15 interviews. And so if you're only interviewing 15 people about why they enlisted, other people logically could say, well, you don't have enough people in your study, you don't have enough data for us to see if what you're finding out is true or not. And that's true, that you give up a lot of what's called generalizability when you have a small n. In other words, so surveys are large N. They try to get a lot of cases. Remember, N means how many people are in your study. And surveys often try to get like 1,500 people. I mentioned earlier in this class when we talked about crime data, when we survey high school students about their crime, or any surveys, like if you look in the paper today, not just today, but a lot of studies recently are about the election. Are people going to vote for Trump or are they going to vote for Biden? And the numbers have been changing. For a while there, Trump was ahead in a lot of the polls. And now they say Biden's catching up in the polls. Well, how many people did they talk to in these polls? Did they survey every voter in America? No, there's 300 million people that are going to vote. So you can't survey all of them. You have to talk to some of them. to figure out what the rest of them think. And that's what surveys do. They have a large N, like 1,500 people, but from 1,500 people, you can tell what 300 million are going to do. It's pretty amazing. But can you tell from 15 people? So qualitative studies are small n. And if you have a small n, you might have not enough cases in your study for you to be able to fully answer your research question. And so that gets now to the question of what is the purpose of these different kinds of studies? What are they good at? Quantitative studies are good at testing a hypothesis. If you want to test hypotheses or theories, I haven't really used the word hypothesis, but theory. Like if your theory is more studying is why the pot smokers got better grades, well, we want to test that theory. We want to go look at data, gather a bunch of data on college students, find out which ones smoke pot, find out how much time people study, and then start crunching the numbers. Is study time correlated with grades? And if you want to test the hypothesis, you need enough numbers in your study, enough data to see if the hypothesis is true. Well, you can't test a hypothesis on a small number of people. Like if I just interviewed 5 or 6 people about their pot smoking, and they say, yeah, I smoke pot and I study all the time when I smoke pot and that's why I'm getting good grades. I couldn't then go to the scientific community and say, I talked to 5 people and they said they study a lot when they smoke pot. And so that's why it's pot smoking that gets the higher grades. Well, the scientific community say 5 people is not sufficient N for us to conclude that what you found out was true. You need to have more people in your study. You need to do a quantitative study. So small N studies aren't good for testing hypotheses. You can't decide if it's true or not when you have that few people in your study. What can you do though? You can generate hypotheses. You can come up with ideas that might or might not be true, but that need to be tested on larger samples. So that's what qualitative studies are really good at doing. If you go and talk to 15 people, like I did for my military enlistment study, I found some interesting things out about those 15 guys. Like almost all of them said they didn't enlist for money reasons. It wasn't like they were getting paid better in the military than they could get somewhere else. And almost all of them didn't say it was because they wanted to serve their country because they were such patriots. Almost all of them said it had to do with their identity needs, that they were feeling like losers in their life, and they thought that if they go in the military and have a uniform and go through some training, that their friends and their family wouldn't see them as losers anymore. And so in my study, in my hypothesis, I said, well, maybe that's a reason a lot of young men are entering the military was because they have identity needs. They feel like their civilian jobs aren't making them feel like winners, and having something more meaningful to do with their lives was something that would give them more happiness with who they are. But that's just a guess. When you only have 15 people that you talk to, then the scientific community would say, well, Mark, that's not a conclusive study because you only interviewed 15 people. But by going really in depth with those 15 guys, I think I found out things about them that we didn't know from surveys. And we already did have surveys showing when they asked young men, will you or won't you enlist? A lot of them said, I'm not going to. And so the military said, we have this data showing that people don't want to enlist. But then I went in depth with people who did enlist to find out, well, why did you? And so the military said, we're not getting enough people to enlist. So what should we do about that? They said, well, let's offer more money. If we just say in our enlistment ads, you should join the U.S. military, join the U.S. Marines, because you'll get paid a lot more. Well, they were trying to do that and it wasn't working. It wasn't leading to more enlistees. And so doing an in-depth study about why people enlist and saying maybe there's some reasons that the military hasn't thought about yet. And so that was what essentially mine was saying, well, you guys haven't maybe considered this yet, that its identity is more important to these enlistees than money or patriotism. And so maybe when you do your commercials, trying to get people to enlist, maybe there's a way you can focus on that, on their identity and stuff. But the military isn't going to want to start producing new commercials just because I studied 15 people. They're gonna wanna know, is your study generalizable? So they would want to then do a survey. Okay, well, you have an interesting hypothesis there you came up with, but now we need to test that hypothesis on a larger N. We need to now do a survey. So they could say, okay, now we're gonna put a question in our survey that asks about identity, like, are you happy with your civilian identity? Does your civilian job make you feel happy with who you are? Are you proud of your job? And do you tell people about your job and career? Or do you not? Are you is your job just a job, just to pay the bills? And you don't derive much identity from it. If they had data on that, then they could start seeing when we survey 10,000 people and 60% of them say their civilian jobs make them feel like losers. Well, maybe that's, and the ones who said that said they were more likely to enlist than the ones who said their civilian jobs made them feel happy. Well, then maybe we've proved the hypothesis here that a big reason some people enlist is for their identity, not because of money or patriotism. Anyway, I'm just trying to show you that what you can find out from a qualitative study doesn't prove anything. It's just a possibility. It's just an idea that can be tested. But if we want to test the idea and see if it's true or not, we're going to need larger N's, more cases in the study. And so these are the basic ways that sociology is done. When I say interviews, there's a variety of ways that interviews are done that I want to make sure we understand. Field work is the general name for qualitative data gathering. And in-depth interviews are one type of field work. It's called field work because you can't really just do it in your office. If you're a numbers cruncher, if you're a guy that studies survey data, you can do that all on a computer in your office and never have to go talk to anybody. You could be a total computer nerd that's never talked to a real human being, but you've done a lot of sociology by crunching numbers. But if you want to do qualitative research, talking to people, gathering real data from them, or in-depth data, you need to get out of your office and go to the real world where people really are. And interviews are one way to do that. Ethnography is another one. Ethnography is when you actually go and live with a group of people and study them in real time in their real habitat, so to speak. The term ethnography comes from anthropology, and anthropologists are people that tend to go away from their own society, go to another culture in another place, and study that culture. So anthropologists are famous for going and living with a tribe in the Amazon rainforest for 10 years and learning all about that tribe, learning its language, learning its customs, learning its religion. So when you think of anthropology, I don't know if you've ever thought about anthropology, when you think of people living with a tribe of people in the jungle, there's a kind of sociology that's like that too. But instead of going to the jungle, we go to our own sites here in our own country, in our own society. So for example, when I went on tour with a rock band for my master's thesis, I got to live with them. I got to understand them like a tribe. Like, how do they think? How do they act? How do they, what rituals do they engage in? What are their symbols and things that they find important and sacred and all that stuff? And so ethnography, living with a group of people, is a really great way to study them. If you wanted to study college students and their pot smoking, you could do a survey and ask people, do you smoke pot or not? What kind of grades do you get? You could go interview people and just ask them things about their study habits. But wouldn't it be interesting to go enroll in a college and pretend that you're a college student and nobody knows that you're a sociologist? I mean, there are ethical problems with that kind of research where you're doing research but you're not telling people, and the scientific community might say that wasn't ethical what you did. And there have been cases like that. People enrolled as adults in high school and studied the high school as an adult person, even though, and everyone thought they were a teenager. That's pretty unethical, to pretend you're a teenager or a minor when you're not. And other studies are ones, like joining a gang, something like that, a criminal gang, and studying that has ethical issues too. One of my favorite ones along these lines, if you get a chance, check out Nickel and Dime. nickel and dime by Barbara Ehrenreich. She's a famous sociologist. She's a prominent sociologist. She died actually recently. But for this study, she decided to pretend that she was a low-wage American woman worker. So she changed her name, moved to Florida, and tried to get minimum wage jobs. And she wanted to see, her research question is, can you actually survive on the minimum wage in the United States? And so she tried to do it for a year, and she tried to get a job as a waitress and as a hotel, custody, what do you call them, maids and stuff like that. And she tried to rent an apartment and all that stuff. And she's a college-educated, PhD woman and all that. And she found it very difficult to survive on the amount of money that she was getting paid in that year. And she wrote a whole book about it. So it was like an ethnography, like going and joining the American low-wage working class and try to see what it's like to be one of them. And that kind of study was really interesting. But again, people might just look at that study and go, well, how can we trust what you are saying in this book? Because you're just one person and it's all based on you reporting what you experienced. It's a qualitative study. It doesn't prove anything. But it raises interesting hypotheses, things that can be tested by other people with other kinds of data. Am I running over time? Is that why people are seeming to pack up? What time is it? No, I have 2 minutes. And so, and then also, what's the other one I wanted to mention? So in-depth interviews, ethnographies, and then, focus groups are another. People talk a lot about focus groups nowadays. A focus group is a group interview, basically. You get 4 or 5 people together, and you have one interviewer asking all 5 of them to talk to the interviewer for a while in an in-depth way with open-ended questions. And again, I'll just leave you with this idea. It's not a one or the other thing. If we're going to really answer research questions fully, I would say there's a qualitative moment in your question, and there's a quantitative moment. I'll just give you an example. I wanted to study, why do young people not vote? We had a lot of quantitative data showing that young people between the ages of 18 and 25 don't vote at the rates that older people do. We mentioned earlier in this class, they changed the voting age to 18 in the early 70s. It used to be 21. But if young people aren't voting when they're 18 to 21, then you can ask, well, why did we do that? Well, I wanted to know why. So in other words, and I should mention this final point too, when we talk about the purpose of the kind of study, I shouldn't erase that, but we talk about the purpose, quantitative studies can tell us what is going on. So if we have numbers, that tells, it's like a picture of what is going on. So if we want to know, do people or don't they vote? Well, the quantitative data tells us that. Do they or don't they vote? If we want to know, do people or don't people like, pot? Or do they or don't they smoke pot? Quantitative data tells us that. But if we want to know why people do what they do, the why questions, quantitative data is not that helpful for that. So when we had all this data that young people don't vote, what we didn't have was data on why they don't vote. That didn't stop a lot of the media and politicians from saying, well, our young people today are apathetic. Our young people today are disengaged. Our young people today are stupid and slackers. They kept saying about my generation, Generation X, that you're slackers. You just don't want to do what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to be voting and you just don't want to. You're supposed to have jobs by now and you just don't have them. They kept saying about my generation that we're slackers. And I didn't believe it because I knew a lot of young people like myself that wanted to have jobs and we wanted to be involved in politics, but we were feeling like we couldn't be. And so the quantitative data has told us what was going on. People aren't voting. But I wanted to know, why aren't people voting? And I began to interview people. And there's a lot of reasons why people didn't vote. A lot of them said, mainly, I just don't feel like I'm ready yet. Like I really care about politics. I'm not apathetic. I'm paying attention. But I'm just new to college right now. And since I'm new to college, I don't really know things yet. And I don't feel like I should vote because I'll just be voting with ignorance and maybe I'll make the wrong choice and the wrong decisions. And so they were saying, I want to get smarter first. I want to get through college and become more knowledgeable. Then I'll feel like I should vote. So that's a different explanation than they don't care, they're too stupid, they're lazy. It was a different explanation. It was they didn't feel ready yet. And again, I only interviewed some people. So if I have a small n, that possible hypothesis, maybe the reason young people aren't voting is because they don't feel ready yet. Well, we have to test it. So that needs to be then put on a survey to see if that's true, if large numbers of people report that same thing. And so the two things go hand in hand. You start maybe with quantitative data that tells you something, like something is true, and then you ask a question, well, why is that true? And you start doing more in-depth small-scale data studies to see why that might be true. And once you start getting some ideas and guesses about why something might be true, then you go back to a quantitative approach to test that idea and see if it's actually true. And so quantitative and qualitative go hand in hand, and it isn't about what you like better or not. If we really want to answer the research questions, there's a part of the research process that's qualitative, about figuring things out and seeing why things happen. And then there's a more quantitative part where you see if what you thought was true is true or not. All right, we'll see you on next week. Again, if you came in late, if you needed more time for your essay portion, just email me and I can give you the prompt again, and I'll give you until like the end of the weekend to turn that in for you. All right, see you later.